called the Age of Jackson. And the Age of Jackson is basically starts even before Jackson was president. So it starts in the election of 1824, and it doesn't really conclude until about 1850. So what exactly is, and the title of your chapter gives a good indication of what the Age of Jackson is, and it's the rise of mass democracy. We might call this the rise of participatory democracy, meaning ordinary men are now going to be able to participate in government. Now that's transformative. Now I know it's not nearly what, I mean, we had an enormous turnout in this year's election, huge turnout. And so when you think about people flying flags with presidential names on them and candidates' names on them, you think about yard signs, you think about rallies, none of that really happened prior to 1824. You understand? So we go back and look at Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe. None of those five men actively sought the presidency at all. To do so would seem ambitious and would undermine both your credibility as a candidate, but also it would undermine your ethics. Like you would be perceived as somebody who dared to want to pursue. This is one of Aaron Burr's flaws, is that he was seen as ambitious, right? So our first five presidents, while they may have wanted to be president, certainly didn't act like it. You understand? Not to the public, not outside that. Now, I've already tried to, what's a misnomer, Addie? All right, so yeah, it's important to me that either you gave real name. Kinda. The word nomer is where we get words like nominal, nomenclature, name. So a misnomer is a bad name, a misattributed name. So in other words, historians, while the term era of good feelings is applied to much of the 20s, 1820s, that is, it was really seen by many to not be quite an accurate phrase, particularly because of what things, what had happened under President Monroe that were not necessarily good feeling.
I want to say the stock market.
All right, well, it wasn't a stock market, but it was a panic. The first economic crisis in American history occurred, like collapse, recession. So the panic of 1819 was during Monroe's presidency. Good. What else? That's it? That's all we got? Guys, looking back on President Trump.
The country was divided over.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
The country was divided over slavery, the Immoral Compromise.
The first true test of sectionalism, first true test of debate over slavery since the Constitutional Convention, which led to what historic event? The Missouri Compromise, good Gabriel. The MoCom, right. So that definitely was true. The dispute about whether or not the federal government should play a role in the development of infrastructure or not. One of the questions I think I asked on your test, or certainly do remember asking, is why was road building facing such adversity? I mean, who's opposed to roads? Abraham Lincoln's very first speech as a congressional candidate was about roads and canals. Everybody likes roads, right? Especially new ones. Why not support roads? Well, it turns out not everybody likes roads. Who was opposed to them? Now, the South didn't mind having roads. In fact, they would have loved to gotten a few more. They didn't get very many. All right, first of all, canal builders. Why wouldn't canal builders like roads? They don't use a canal. All right, it's competition. All right, they didn't like it. Who else didn't like it? Guys, there's a thing, again, it goes back to this, we were having a conversation about the big picture. And the big picture is sometimes so alien to people that it's like there's no picture. And that's okay. But New England was well aware that every road you built in New England westward was a way for people to leave New England. Why would that bother New Englanders? Well, they're concerned about representation. Very good. Every person that goes westward is a westward voter. Excellent answer. Another answer. My class is much more about solving a mystery.
They need people for factories.
Say it again.
They need people for factories.
Yes, this is a period where factories are booming. They need labor. The more people that are in New England not leaving, the cheaper wages can be. This is straight out of David Ricardo's Iron Law of Wages. You increase population, you increase labor supply, you decrease wages. Why?
because of the
More competition for work. People are willing to work for less. We've seen that where Americans are not willing to work for less, and they're just not working at all in some cases, which is a bizarre world for me. All right, so very good, Nicholas. And then the third one is, remember what James Madison did to a road building bill?
He vetoed it.
He vetoed it. He said it's not constitutional. In other words, if there were going to be any federal government assistance of highways, it would have to be an interstate highway, and there won't but one during this entire period. So East and West are starting to shape up as rivals, so to speak, as well as North and South. I should say starting to shape up, but they'd always been kind of rivals. This election was pure in the sense of East versus West, rural versus urban, not East versus West state-wise, but within states, rural versus urban. Okay? If you want to pose it that way, I would like to pose it as a person. There you go. So, the rise of the common man. So, characteristics of Jacksonian democracy. In other words, what were the trends? What was happening in America to make it more democratic? Now, I want to remind you, the founders, particularly the Federalist founders, had no love for democracy. They wrote about it being a not very good idea. All right? They consistently said we are to be the leaders, not necessarily people who just echo for the common man. Jackson is going to come along ultimately and say, I'm the echo for the common man. All right? And he's absolutely an uncommon person. By the way, this was Donald Trump's favorite president. So give you some insight for Trump's desires. So what was happening? Well, one, voting requirements were changed dramatically in many states, particularly if you're looking up here at the states that are orange. What does the orange state say? Universal
white male suffrage.
White male suffrage, good. So in other words, the green in the 1800 elections were states that required property as eligibility to vote. Property ownership, not renting, not leasing, not tenant farming. So you had to own land in all these green areas. By 1830, ironically, there were only two left, one of which was Jackson's home state. Actually, he's from North Carolina, by the way. So, I know, right? It's odd. But nonetheless, some states did maintain qualifications that you at least had to pay some degree of tax. Now, there was no income tax in America in the 1800s, so what this usually meant was a tax on some sort of good that you could prove. Proof was saleable. In other words, or property tax, but not necessarily property ownership. Okay. So why is the orange, though, particularly noteworthy? Universal male suffrage. Guys, we don't get to black men voting until we let white men vote, so to speak, right? Suffrage meaning the right to vote. We don't get to women voting until we let ordinary white men vote. Regular, working class, 21 and older white men. Now that's progress. The same thing is going to happen in England at about the exact same time, expanding the electorate to 12% of the populace. All right, so that's about what you're looking at here. Not much, but it's a whole lot more than what it used to be. And so because of that, you're going to see massive voter turnout, massive increase in voter turnout. Another element of Jacksonian democracy. Looking at the 1840s, you'll see in the 80+ percentile, right? High 70s and 80s during this period. So those are record numbers. So enthusiasm for voting. By the way, it's because of a system that emerged called the spoils system that people enthusiastically participated in. They voted literally in the hopes that they would get what? It's a spoils system. Jobs. The spoils. So keep in mind, back then the president appointed every federal job. Every federal job. You hear that? Let that sink in, because these were decent jobs. The federal jobs have always been decent. They're government jobs, right? But every single job in the federal government was appointed by the president. So that meant, at least in the executive branch. So that meant lots of jobs, and that's one of the reasons why people voted. This is what we call, looking number 4, what we call patronage. Patronage. Okay? Patronage is another word for a patron, somebody who supports you, right? So this was a whole new era of campaigning. What else did you see? Well, these are some other examples. The end of what was called King Caucus. The end of King Caucus. 24 will be the last national election where a caucus chose the candidate. A caucus is a party meeting. a meeting of party members, elites usually, like the leaders of the party would handpick the nominees. Now they began having what we call nominating conventions, national nominating conventions. Now, today, we've gone even more democratic than nominating conventions. The nominating convention is the outcome of what much more democratic process.
Primaries.
That's good. Very good. Primaries. So the primary system is the way we democratically elect the nominee for the party's candidate, right? So it's like the first election. But that didn't exist yet. We didn't have primaries yet. Got that? But we did have conventions, which lots and lots of citizens went to. More democratic than what? Than the caucus, King caucus. Right. You started now having electors instead of the electors being appointed by the legislatures. People ran for elector. People would run and get elected to be electors. Keep in mind, again, electors were free to vote for whoever they wanted. But you start to see the electors voting in ways that reflect the will of the people. Now that's new. You might not to say that the first 5 presidents weren't popular amongst the people. Right? It's that they weren't really chosen by the people. You understand? So if you look up here on the Abraham Lincoln poster I have right here, at age 25, Abraham Lincoln was elected to the legislature. At age 31, he was defeated for elector. So if you were an up-and-comer in the American political scene, you would be an elector. That was like before you became some other statewide office. The spoil system. Now, folks, we're going to associate this with Andrew Jackson. Spoil system is most noted with Andrew Jackson, but it's not really accurate to say he's the spoil system guy. In reality, many presidents before and after Jackson would allow for the spoil system. He just made it a hallmark of his governance. He called it rotation in office. In essence, like a form of term limit on federal jobs. You're out, somebody else can do it. Okay? We're going to see our first third parties emerge. Anybody know what the very first third party in America was? It's all right. I wouldn't expect you to. The Anti-Masons Party. They were a party that was created to run against the Masons. They didn't like secretive societies. Jackson was a Mason. Washington was a Mason. The Anti-Masonic Party, they were called. All right. Popular campaigns. So long before there were get out the vote rallies with President Trump or President-elect Biden, you would see these kind of things. We call this stump speaking. They would go out to a frontier town, and there would be a chopped down tree, and they would stand on the stump. Today, that's a synonym for going out and rallying people to vote. It's called stump speeches. Okay, so you have real stump speeches, but perhaps long term, the most significant is the development of a stable 2-party system, a consistent 2-party system. So, what emerges out of the era of good feelings? Why is it called era of good feelings?
Because there was
only one party, right? But within that party, you're going to have 2 different groups emerge. One are called national Republicans. This is John Quincy Adams. And then they will lead to an anti-monarchical name. What name is opposed to kings? Whigs. Well, this national Republican group we're talking about is King Jackson. King Andrew I, they call it. All right. And then the Democrats are going to drop what the name? The Republican Party. They're just going to be the Democrats from then on. So from 1828 to present, that's the Democratic Party. So if you are a member of the Democrat, like local or state party, they hold an event every year called the Democratic J&J banquet. So everybody know what the J&J and that banquet is or dinner? Sorry, I don't blame you. Jefferson and Jackson. So they call themselves the Democrats have a J&J dinner every year, locally or statewide. Now, I think that's wrong. I don't think they should be calling themselves a Jefferson and Jackson dinner. It should be like the FDR and LBJ dinner. Like the modern Democratic Party smells nothing like Jackson and Jefferson, all right? Except for maybe the common man part, maybe. I'll give them that. At least part of the common man crowd. But nonetheless, these are all hallmarks of the age of Jackson, not singularly because of him. Everybody understand this? In other words, this emerged in America. So what we really mean when we say the age of Jackson is the ascent of democracy for the common man. What do I mean by common man? Who's the common man? Well, he's white back then, that's right. So he might be a yeoman farmer. Remember what that means? A subsistence farmer with not a lot of produce extra, kind of surviving, maybe on the frontier. He might be a mechanic. What's a mechanic? 1820s mechanic. So if you worked with machinery in a factory, you were called a mechanic. Not if you repaired vehicles, but if you worked with machines, they called you a mechanic. So the factory workers and the farmers were in the same party, which was a potent party, potent combination of parties, working class Americans. Okay? And we'll get to the rise of the Whigs, and then ultimately, with Abraham Lincoln, the Republicans. Okay? So yes, today's Republican Party began with Abraham Lincoln being president. Not really the same party anymore either. There are elements that are consistent with both parties throughout all their history. Not really the same, though. I mean, keep in mind, it's 230 years of history, stuff changes over time. Names stay, but the events change. So we're going to look at the election of 1824. But to do that, we have to understand the man who becomes the namesake for this whole period, and that's Andrew Jackson himself. Now, what do we already know about Andrew Jackson?
Who's that?
Mm-hmm.
Who is that? I heard talking about him.
Yeah, we need to talk more about him. Okay, so maybe you should recall a few things about Andrew Jackson. One, he's a war hero. What war?
Battle of New Orleans.
Yes, very good. The Battle of New Orleans. So if you want to become president of the United States, war hero is a good start. You know, we have quite a few generals who became president before and after. He had been a territorial governor, though, and attorney. What territory? Okay, well, let me take you through his life. So here's where Jackson moved to. Jackson was born in North Carolina. So you might want to write down a little bit of Jackson's bio. It's relevant. Jackson was born in North Carolina. He was part of a group of people called the Regulator Movement. Does that ring any bells? He was born outside of Salisbury, North Carolina, and of Scots-Irish family. You don't have to know that part. All right. His brother and mother died in British captivity during the Revolution. Hear that? So he hated all things British. His mother and brother died in British captivity. He read the Declaration of Independence to his local community in North Carolina. He was the only literate kid around. That got his face slashed by a British officer with a saber. So he had a scar on his face from a British soldier. So you don't have to write all that down, but just be aware that he really despised the Brits. Okay. He moved over the Appalachians. Keep in mind, back then, North Carolina and Tennessee were like connected, and settled in what is today Nashville, where he did what we call read for the law. You guys know what that means, read for the law? It's okay. Back then, not everybody could go to law school. Hey, hardly anybody could go to law school now, but back then, even fewer people could go to law school. So what some people did is they read for the law, and that means they apprenticed under a lawyer or a judge, and he did that. And so he became a circuit court judge in Tennessee, known for his fairness, but also for his toughness. His court was disrupted one day by like tumult in the street. He went outside, and there was a drunk guy walking around waving a pistol. Jackson, without any guns on him, apparently stared him down and said, actually, he did have a gun on him, but he didn't draw it. He said, put that down. His name's Russell Bean. Put that down or I'll blow you through. Russell Bean writes that he looked at Jackson in the eye and he could tell that man meant he would shoot me. He really meant it. So he put the gun down. Jackson had 2 bullet wounds in him, bullets left in him from duels. So he drank whiskey. He was a gambler. He was a tough guy. Nobody was really that close with Jackson in the truest sense. Except for his love for his wife. And he did like the company of women, like so many great men do, who they find it calming. If that makes, I don't know how that's possible, but nonetheless, they find women's presence calming. He was a very fascinating person because he was from the rough, but he took over and created this plantation that you see here. This is the Hermitage. It's a plantation near Nashville, and he owned lots of slaves too. So he was a slave-owning general. His soldiers affectionately referred to him as Old Hickory. Old Hickory. He was tall and thin, 6'1" or 2", I think, skinny as a rail. He always had health problems, but he toughed them out, like no matter what. So a hickory is a tough stick. You know, like a stick that's as hard as a rock, right? So Jackson was like that old stick, you know. Here he is in the Seminole Wars, beating up on the Spanish, capturing runaway slaves, killing anybody who got in his way. So a very sort of rough-hewn frontiersman. This guy knew Davy Crockett, you know, that's this time period in history, right? So these are guys who were famous politically, not only for dueling, you know, that was actually seen as a success story. You know, one of the guys who shoots him in a duel is his Secretary of War. No, is a congressman later, and he offers to have the bullet removed from Jackson. And so Jackson sends him the like has the bullet removed, sends it to him, and then the guy's like, you know what? He's had it longer than I ever had it. I should send it back. You know, possession's 9/10 of the law kind of thing. So he finally did have one of the bullets removed for lead poisoning. The other one, they couldn't get out. They couldn't get it out of him. It would have killed him to do the surgery. And this is from shooting men in duels. So Jackson had killed people, you know, like literally in duels, okay, as well as in war. So he was a really complicated guy. He was the sort of hero of the common man who was anything but common. You see why Donald Trump might like that? A billionaire from New York being popular amongst the NASCAR crowd? Not normally how it plays, is it? But in this case, you know, now I will say Donald Trump does not have any of the military experience or record that General Jackson had. But, you know, the idea of like, while he may be different from us, he is us. You know, there's that mentality. So that's how Jackson's Democratic supporters felt about it. And he's going to run as the common man champion. Okay? Rally around the hickory tree. Hickory being Jackson, Hickory. Here's an actual like poster to vote for Jackson and his ticket. But he has a problem, and that is there are a lot of good candidates in this election. So I would definitely be familiar with all 4 candidates in the election of 1824. This was the last caucus election. From now on, you'll have nominating conventions after 24. So you have the great compromiser, Henry Clay. Now keep in mind, all of these fellows are running, including Andrew Jackson. I don't want to leave them out. These are his opponents. All right. And so they're not, it's a one-party system. So they're all running as, you know, one party's candidate, in essence. They're just running for office. The great figure, Henry Clay. James Monroe, Secretary of State. By the way, think about it, John Quincy Adams, son of another president, John Adams, right? Clay's from Kentucky, Jackson's from Tennessee. So Clay and Kentucky are the 2 rivals for the West's love. John C. Calhoun, who's also considered vice presidential potential. You know what I mean? Now they've made the tickets. You know what I mean by the tickets? 12th Amendment ticket. And a guy named William Crawford runs for Georgia. I'll tell you why his picture is not up here in a minute. So there's 5 candidates. Now, why is John Quincy Adams kind of an odds-on favorite? What was Monroe's job before becoming president?
Secretary of State.
Secretary of State. What was Madison's job before becoming president?
Secretary of State.
What was Jefferson's job before becoming president?
Secretary
of State. So what was kind of seen as the step, by the way, what was Hillary Clinton's job before she ran for office? You get the pattern here, right? Secretary of State, you know, because one of the most important roles that our president has is our chief diplomat. And so who better to be in that role than the guy who's just our chief diplomat, right? So Clay represents the West kind of coalition there. He's very popular amongst the sort of nationalists. John Quincy Adams, also very nationalist, okay? Calhoun, not so nationalist, more interested in the South, particularly South Carolina. Crawford, well, he has a stroke and dies after the election. But this is what happened with the election. What a mess, right? What happens when you run 5 candidates for president, okay? Now, you'll notice Calhoun is going to be the V candidate. They decided that that's probably the better place for him. These 2 different candidates, like, all right? 2 different candidates. But if you look here, who does really well in his home state? Right above Ohio. And so Clay, that's where he expects to win. Jackson, though, Crawford wins his home state, Georgia, and one elector from New York. How does Jackson do? Well, if you look up here at the map, what we would call these pie charts are plurality, meaning the plurality. It's spelled like plural, P-L-U-R. So Jackson wins the plurality, P-L-U-R-A-L-I-T-Y, plurality. He gets 38%. The second closest to the electoral is 32% for John Quincy Adams, right? So people looking at this would say, well, Jackson must have been the president, right? Like he should have won. Did he win the lion's share of the popular vote? Again, the plurality, not that that matters, but it's useful to look at. But Jackson doesn't win the presidency. Now, Clay, anybody guess what he finishes? Constitution says the top 3 vote getters go to the U.S. House of Representatives in the term of the election. Clay's out of the race. Guess who dies? Crawford. So ain't but who left?
Adams and Jackson.
So when that happens, this becomes a 2-person race based on the House. Oh, it's not up here. I don't have a PowerPoint. Sorry, but based in the House. So even though Jackson has won the plurality, he has not won what word? The majority. The Constitution is clear. You guys should all know it this week. Got to have 270. Can't win with 269. Why? What's 270? It's the majority. You can't be elected president on the plurality.
Where's Chopper?
Vice president.
Oh.
Well, yeah, vice president. Now, he bumped him down. They made that choice. These were Jackson's opponents. He's running for VP as both these guys. Yeah, I'm sorry. He's running as a VP candidate for both of them. All right. Because he will help deliver where? South Carolina, they didn't, not good if you're on 2 different ballots. So. Kind of split the vote. But not that anybody was voting that way. The point is that Jackson's winner in the mind of his supporters. His supporters believe they won. But the Constitution, this is not the last time this will happen, so let's be careful. The first time the House of Representatives elected president was who? Jefferson. Very good. The election of 1800, you had an electoral tie between Jefferson and Burr. So Jefferson, got elected in the House. If there is no clear winner, this would have happened last week. If neither Donald Trump nor Joe Biden had received 270 votes, then the House of Representatives would have elected the President of the United States. Happens 3 times in history. This is one of those times. Okay? And so in 1824, the election goes into the House. Who are the top vote getters? So all the news is pretty clear to Jackson supporters who should have won, they say. Jackson. Even though that's not numerically correct, who gets to elect is the House, not the popular vote, so to speak. So when they get there, now who is a very powerful figure in Congress? Very powerful. Who's no longer in the running? Who has led a major compromise working in the House?
Henry Clay, the Speaker of the House.
Yeah, so Henry Clay, pulling a page right out of one of his heroes, Alexander Hamilton, he's going to throw the election to his supporters and say, supporters of mine, vote for who? Adams, because Clay can't stand it. It's a personal thing here, right? And Clay doesn't like Jackson's style of politics per se either. Now, by the way, Clay was very similar to Jackson in some respects. Big time whiskey drinker, big time womanizer. Well, Jackson was a womanizer, but anyway, the point is Clay is kind of rough country too. So it's a rival for the sections of the West. Like who's going to be the top dog out West? So Clay makes Jackson, finishing second in the House. Clay's supporters end up voting for JQA. Now, guys, there is no clear example for certitude that JQA does anything to get this done. In other words, Clay and JQA can't really stand. John Quincy Adams, JQA, can't really stand Henry Clay that much. Because again, John Quincy Adams is like his father. Very puritanical, very stern, very critical of almost everything, but very, very well qualified. Well, when JQA becomes president, who gets the awesome job of Secretary of State? Henry Clay. And so what do Jackson's supporters allege has occurred here? A what word? It's a phrase for the election of 1824. a corrupt bargain. In other words, John Quincy Adams sold out the presidency, so to speak, to give Henry Clay the Secretary of State and get the job. Or Henry Clay offered up his support in exchange for the Secretary of State. Now, we don't know that that's a fact, still to this day. We also don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. In other words, John Quincy Adams is not breaking any rules if he does do it. What is Joe Biden working on right now? His transition team. That's what they call it, transition team, like the people you would pick to be in the next administration if the outcome is finalized. All right? And so let's just imagine if it were going to go down to the House and he talked to Nancy Pelosi and said, make sure you vote for me now, whatever. It would be a corrupt bargain. It'd be politics. But for Jackson supporters, they feel cheated. They feel like he should be president, not John Quincy Adams. And there's going to be a cloud of distrust of the entire Adams administration for the next 4 years. It took 9/11 to help George Bush erase the cloud of sort of not legitimate in the election of 2000. After 9/11, people kind of forgot about, 2000, But the point is that they're not going to forget with John Quincy Adams. And Jackson supporters are going to start running Jackson for president immediately after this is over. I saw the other day where somebody floated the idea that Donald Trump would run in 2024 as a possibility. And it's certainly not without precedent. Grover Cleveland served 9 consecutive terms. But Jackson supporters feel like the man and the Times were cheated here.
Wait, did you say the supporters?
Clay. Clay, who doesn't get enough votes to make it to the House race. Clay had made it to the House race. He probably would have been like, vote for me. But nonetheless, under the 12th Amendment, they were the top 3, and Crawford's dead. So he's not really a factor anymore. And, I guess I should emphasize, Clay was Speaker of the House, so he had enormous pull. Clay was already that job. Okay? So that means when JQA comes in, he's going to be really unpopular. I don't have a lot of notes for you on John Quincy Adams, but I will give you a few details before we get to 1828. First of all, John Quincy Adams was, the book calls him a chip off the old glacier, I think. John Quincy Adams was brilliant as Secretary of State. In many ways, he's the creator of the Monroe Doctrine. He's the guy that stopped Russia's expansion. He's the guy that gets Oregon without really a fight. He's the guy that secures Florida. So he's had a brilliant career. The problem is he presides over a period that is very shifting away from nationalism. Very quickly shifting, excuse me. So do you guys remember I told you there's a feeling of nationalism after War 1812? What's 8 years later? And I can assure you Americans changed their mind a lot in 8 years. If you go back to 8 years ago, President Obama got reelected, right? 4 years after that, sort of the anti-Obama got elected, President Trump. So we changed our mind a lot as people. And what had been a period of real nationalism was quickly drying up. And now what ism takes the place of nationalism? The word is sectionalism. And that means where you care more about the fate of your particular state/region than you do about what's in the best interest of the country, particularly because of the wake of the Panic of 1819. If you think about that kind of shrunk our nationalist ambitions quite a bit, this economic crisis, all right? And so when you look at JQA's personal traits, he can't really negotiate. He's kind of like his own father. Ironically, he is going to be sort of a man without a support network, you understand, in Washington. And then he's going to support, look at what he supports if you were following along. He supports things like roads construction, highway construction, internet for national, a national observatory. Okay, so national, something like the Smithsonian. But guys, if you're feeling like you're barely surviving on the frontier, how does a national observatory sound? It's a colossal waste of money. You just ask people how they feel about space exploration in the middle of a recession. They're pretty much not a fan of it right now, right? Because it feels like money wasted when we're having a hard time making ends meet. So that's kind of how JQA turned out there. It wasn't his fault necessarily; it's just bad timing. And also, he was probably not well suited to be an executive. And then on top of all else, he actually believed that you should treat Native Americans fairly. Like buy land or honor treaties and stuff like that. He might disappear to Westward Grove and he'd say, oh no, we have these treaties we have to recognize. Some of the treaties he negotiated. So that's very unpopular amongst the frontier type, who, by the way, are already. See, here's the thing. I'm going to be real honest with you. I don't want to any way poo-poo on any of your hopes or whatever, but the next 4 years, we're not going to see a whole lot get done. You really thought Joe Biden was going to come in and do like massive $1 trillion spending plan? It ain't going to happen. And not only that, but Trump's allies and supporters will do everything they can to make sure he doesn't get reelected. So this is we're in that phase of politics. He's talking all this kumbaya. We're going to reach hands across the aisle and make it up. It's not going to happen. It's just not. And I hate that. I hate that about our country right now. But it's not the first time we've been there. Like, they're not going to work with you. This just in. So Jackson supporters who make up the bulk of the electorate are not going to be supportive of John Quincy Adams, no matter what he does. And that's going to be Trump supporters for the next 4 years. They're going to have a sniff of distrust on anything Biden does, no matter how the election is verified or not. They're going to believe he's not the right guy. Make sense? So that means by 1828, this is where you have the big story of Jackson supporters honestly making a bonehead decision. So Jackson supporters decide, well, I know what we can do. Why don't we do this? Why don't we push through the largest tariff in American history and force JQA to veto it? Right? That seems reasonable, right? So if you're following along in your reading guide, you would switch over to the tricky tariff of abomination. Tricky tariff of abomination. So throughout the 1820s, we had a tariff. You may recall the tariff of 1816, the first protective tariff, right? And the tariff had helped create or spur business. Who hated it? Who were not a fan of high tariffs? Still aren't. All right, so you guys living in Virginia, this should help because we're Virginians. So if you think about your shoes, your boots, your clothing, it's all made abroad. It's all made in some cheap third world sweatshop, right? Unless you are extraordinary. I mean, even Carhartt is not a made in America anymore. I was really heartbroken. All right. Nothing's made in America anymore. It's made in some, 16-year-old Chinese person or 14-year-old Vietnamese person, right? This just in. But we don't care because it's out of sight, out of mind, right? I don't blame you. Problem is, if you slap a tariff on foreign products, and President Trump certainly learned this the hard way, then there's a huge ripple effect through everything else we buy. You understand? What's a tariff? It's not just a tax. It's a tax on an import. So we talked about boots, right? Did you and I talk about boots? If you were a boot maker here in America versus, let's do a boot analogy. Let's make some boots. Addie's a boot maker. All right. The Brits have been making boots for decades. They can sell boots over here for $1. Addie cannot find a way to make a boot any cheaper than $1.25. Just can't do it because she's brand new at it. Her supply chain is short. It is not extensive yet. You got to figure out all this stuff. Your manufacturing costs, your capital outlay. It's all, you can't do it. It's $1.25. Gabriel buys boots. He's like, Brit boots are good. Look, you're wearing Brit boots right now. You're wearing Brit boots. They're Doc Martens, right? Not even wearing American. You're not wearing Addie boots. All right, so the Gabes are buying Brit boots for $1, and they're happy with their boots. And they're like, hey, I don't care we fought a war twice with Britain. They got a better boot. I don't care if we fought a war with Vietnam. I'm probably wearing clothes made by those communists. All right, because we just want to spend money cheaply on garbage. So Addie's like, I got to get boots made. She goes to her friend Daniel Webster, happens to be a Federalist. He's still almost a Federalist in New England. She's like, Senator Webster, I need a hand. I need a tax on British boots. It's like, you got the tariff of 1816. She's like, no, that's not good enough. I want the tariff of 1828. I want 12-year later tariff. Webster's like, okay, I'll take a look at it. Meanwhile, Jackson supporters and all of their geniusness say, we're going to create a tariff so high that John Quincy Adams will veto it. Right? Because it's too high to be possible. No way we would actually want to pay it. It's way too freaking high. We'll make it 60%, 60% tax. So they slap us, the Jacksonites slap a 60% tariff close to it. Keep in mind, there's really no such thing as the tariff. It's the aggregate of all taxes on all imports, the tariff rate. So now, how much do your boots cost? Your boots still cost $1.25, right? British boots cost $1 what? 60% tariff. $1.60. Now they're what? Now you're gonna buy Addie. Because hey, by now she's making decent boots and they're cheaper. The problem is Addie is a capitalist working well with the government. She says, well, why don't I just raise my boots to $1.50? So now you're making even more of a profit. Because who's going to pay $1.50 for local boots or $1.60 for foreign boots? The problem is if you're a Southerner, any boot you buy is foreign. It's either foreign from New England or foreign from England. So if you were buying boots at $1 earlier, right, and they were good boots, now you have to buy them at $1.50, and they might not even be the best boots. Tariffs are what we call protectionism. So now our industry flourishes, but who's stuck with the price tag? It's not a tax, really. It's just that simple. Because the foreigners don't pay it. Who pays it? It's Americans who pay tariffs. This is why Harley Davidson had to stop their factories in England. Had to stop making Harleys for England because, well, tariffs. You understand? Cut into their profit margin, which was already fairly razor thin. So the Dems, Andrew Jackson's party, creates a tariff which they hate on purpose, thinking, what will JQA do? And he didn't veto it. He signed it. So now they have the highest tariff ever. It's called the Black Tariff or the Tariff of Abominations. Great, right? I know nobody gets fired up about tariffs, but let me promise you, if the amount you paid for something almost doubled or 50% increase, you would not be happy about it, right? This is why President Trump's protectionism is really kind of a dated idea. Nobody else really advocates this. It didn't last long. Because it's everything's interconnected now. All the supply chains intercross. Like everything will go up if you raise the tariff. Man. So anyway, that is looming over the election of 1828. If I understand. So who is poised and ready to be elected? Jackson. But this time, his enemies are going to come at him in force. Last time it was like a catch-all election. This time, the old Federalists, now National Republicans, that's what JQA is now called, a National Republican. It's not JQA doing this, but it's the party. This is the thing that burns me up. Well, sometimes it is the president, but most of the time it's the people who support the candidates who are terrible about what they say. Because here's what they attack Andrew Jackson for. Now that is Rachel Robards, but actually her original name is Rachel Donaldson. Does anybody know where Rachel Donaldson is from? She's from Chatham. Yeah, her family moved to Tennessee from here. A lot of families from here moved to Tennessee. When she got to Tennessee, she married a guy named Lewis Robards. And then he abandoned her, literally. So this was not unusual. I know that sounds terrible, but the husband just left. He up and left her. So as time went by, she assumed, because she couldn't do this herself, what must Lewis Robards have done? Got a divorce, right? So she meets Judge Jackson, later General Jackson. He falls in love. They get married, and that's when his supporters send him a note, hey, she's already married, dude. So Jackson, as a judge, moves speedily to have their marriage ended, divorced. Lewis Robards should have divorced her, but he never did. He's a bum. All right? But the critics of Andrew Jackson are going to call him a bigamist. Married to more than one person, like his wife's a bigamist. He's involved in bigamy, he was immoral in those days, still pretty much. So they do so many of she calls these attacks daggers and wormwood, like poison. She dies. She dies. Now, the exact cause of death is some sort of like hematoma or something. But most people think she died of a broken heart. Like the politics killed her. Jackson will be in mourning, and he will despise the men who did this. So now he has his wife was killed by the British. Not his wife, his mother, his brother, and now his wife's killed by his political opponent. So he takes politics personally. He is our first president to truly treat the office as a personal office. Again, fairly Trump-like, an extension of himself. Kind of that. All right. And so with the election, who does very easily? Jackson wins a rousing victory. It's 178 electors to 83. Notice also that JQA's new party name is National Republican. Now, when he was elected initially, he was a Democratic Republican, but you're starting to see the split. And of course, who voted for JQA regionally? New England, but this looks like the old Federalist. In fact, what was JQA's father? The Federalist. So in reality, it's not like the Federalists truly died. They got what? What's a better word? They got absorbed. The problem is, what really was not a place for the Federalists and the arts. You can't be a one party with those two differences of opinion, right? So out of the National Republicans is going to grow the next party, the Whigs. So the Whigs are the old Federalists. Make sense? So Federalists, National Republicans, they're in the area with good feelings, and then the Whigs, W-H-I-G, just like the British who are opposed to monarchical strength. So Jackson comes in, he's elected, and right out the gate, Washington is horrified. The city of it is. It's jokingly called the inaugural brawl. What does that mean? Well, these are rough-hewn backcountrymen who come all the way to Washington. What do they do when they get here? They throw the world's biggest cake party. These are whiskey drinking, beer drinking, frontiersmen. Scotsmen, a lot of them Scots-Irish. So they smash up the furniture, they bust the china, they break the windows. Jackson has a rib broken in the crush of the people. They call it the inaugural brawl, but it's a party for who? For who? What kind of people? The common man, the masses. Now, to call Jackson a common man is a bit of a stretch, all right? First of all, like I said, Jackson had been a judge, a regional governor, a astoundingly successful general, and he's very, very rich. He's a massive slave owner now. So he's not true. He was an uncommon man who served as the tribune for the common man. That makes sense. But what is his faith in the common man? This is where he's very Jeffersonian. Remember, Jefferson wanted to be the people, not the elites. Distrust of the elites. I tell people about Donald Trump when he was elected. You guys realize that Donald Trump was not so cool, right? Amongst rich people. Rich people, like really rich, other billionaires look down at Donald Trump. Why? No, lots of billionaires inherit wealth. No, because his best friends were the McMahons. Down in WWF, WWE. Rich people don't hang out with wrestling, do they? Because he ate fast food. He acted like who? A common man, right? And so because of that, hey, if I'm not going to join your country club, I'll make my own. You understand? So that's why, again, Trump's kind of like the rich kid who didn't fit in with some of the other rich kids. Keep in mind, he's a second-generation immigrant family, right? His granddaddy wasn't from here. So it was an interesting story to me because Jackson was not a common man, not by any stretch of the imagination. But who did he hang out with? Who did he respect? Democrats' problem is they always strike people snotty now, and because they're losing the blue collar vote. They got it back some apparently, but not sure. If Dems want to be successful, or Republicans, you got to attract who? Ordinary working class people. Like that's the people who make up the bulk of our country. Big job. So he was the representative of the common man, and he believed that, like himself, did he start from nothing? An orphan, the only thing he had going for him is a little bit of education, and that was not in school. And so he was a self-made man, and that's in many ways the legacy of America, the American dream. Okay? But yeah, the inaugural brawl. Now, who were this Jacksonian coalition? Who were the Democrats under Jackson? Well, you had rich plantation owners, frontiersmen, state and local politicians, and immigrants. Those are the machinists. So is that a powerful group? Only missing a handful of people and you have all of America. So this is the Jacksonian democracy people. Now, later on in history, when the Democrats were the party of the Confederacy, the only thing that will be dropped from it is what? Immigrants. So this is the future party of the Confederacy. Okay? They're shifting away from Jefferson's idealized because who's now voting more? Ordinary people with all of their shortcomings and all of their possibilities, Why then is a spoils system useful? Patty, if you got elected, would there be a place for Emma in your government? Probably. So we call that, when you hire your family, nepotism. It's a form of like favoritism, nepotism, helping out your family. But the spoils system is bringing those who up with you. You know that expression, like when you make it big. So the people who voted for you, the people who supported you, people who campaigned for you, you find jobs for them. Because the federal government's jobs are going to, and here's the catch. Let's say your daddy is a construction worker. You're a construction worker, even better. You make buildings and you employ, let's say 20 people. And I am a local government official. Let's call me counselor. Okay. We'll pretend we're both Jacksonian Democrats. All right. We're Jacksonian Democrats. We're Jackson JD. And you know that I'm going to build a local school as my government job. I know that you can get all 20 of your people to vote for me. What do I make sure you get? What do I make sure you get? The school contract, which will give you lots of work. In exchange, you'll what? Vote for me. You guys see how this works? The government spends money. It spends money all the time. Now today you can't do that. Today it's called corruption. But back then it wasn't corrupt. It was a spoils system. Well, now, back then, not only it would have been a school because you didn't have schools, but let's say you helped secure my nomination or you voted for me, then I would give you a job as tax assessor for the frontier, and you may only have to work a couple days a month, but you'll get paid a lot of money for that job. Make sense?
Yeah.
So you actually got something. But today, when I vote, I don't get much out of it.
You got a sticker.
I don't even want. Yeah, right. But what I'm saying is neither one of these candidates are going to do anything that I'm really serious about. My kids' college tuition is not going to go down any because it's not a national issue, it's a state issue. All right. Long-term security, Social Security, and Medicare not going to get fixed by either one of these guys. All right. Not even talking about it. Lowering the deficit, forget it. They'll both blow it up. So the issues that matter to me. So you can see why voting for me is not that big a deal. I mean, I do it because it's my duty. It's like doing jury duty. It's your duty. But back then, you actually voted why? No, why specifically? You got something for it. You got money for it. You got a job for it. You guys understand that? People went and voted because they're getting a kickback. Yeah. So fair enough. All right, let's move on. So when Jackson comes in, here's a painting of him. Jackson has a cabinet, keeping with the tradition of the cabinet, and he appoints people in the cabinet from various important roles in the Democratic Party. But right away, he has an issue. So one of his cabinet members is John Eaton, Secretary of War, right? And while he was staying with the Timberlakes, this lady, and it's not Justin Timberlake, but another Timberlake. But while they were staying together, there was a rumor of an affair. Now, affairs have happened throughout all of history, And that was sort of the kind of stuff that you didn't talk about in open print, open conversation, but people talked about it. And then her husband died. After the affair. So, but they're not accusing him of killing her. It's just, so then he marries her. Now, again, I would remind you that our current president has married two of the people he had affairs with, right? So not that particularly unusual. But the problem is the cabinet circle of wives. All the cabinet members had wives, right? And the wives were snobby and excluded Peggy Eaton. They wouldn't let her be in the club, so to speak. And so now, as you and I are hearing it, well, that sounds stupid. But these are human beings. These are real people, and she can't go to parties without people talking junk about her. So Jackson brings in his cabinet and fusses at them. Y'all need to get this fixed with your women, all right? And they don't. So then he just gets rid of his cabinet. He doesn't govern with a cabinet anymore. And so we call this the Peggy Eaton affair, all right? But what he does govern with is a group of informal advisors, jokingly called the kitchen cabinet. All right, now they don't literally meet in the kitchen, but you know, it's so the kitchen cabinet would be the non-official people who are Jackson's principal advisors. Okay, so but it does tell you something about Jackson. Who was Jackson not going to let get messed with? Women. He found himself like the honorable savior of women. You know, like after his wife died, after his mama died, he gets real bent on it. And so he represents that Southern mentality of honor. You, sir, have offended my honor. You know, like that's the kind of Jacksonian mentality to a degree. He's of that period, you know, the Southern chivalry, the Southern slaveholder. Okay, so let's now talk about that tariff. Remember that tariff? The black tariff, so-called. Now, who was VP under Calhoun? I mean, under JQA? And well, he's also Andrew Jackson's vice president. Calhoun was like the vice president sweepstakes. All right, so Calhoun is the vice president under both JQA and Jackson because he's so crucial to delivering South, particularly South Carolina. All right, and he is going to submit a writing to South Carolina. Now, you do need to suck this in, like take this up, okay? You guys remember the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions? What did Jefferson and Madison say you would do if a state felt something violated?
They don't have to follow.
There's a term for it. Nullification. Well, this is the nullification crisis. All right, because neither Virginia nor Kentucky got much support. Jackson comes in. In the meantime, his vice president has ghostwritten a document called the South Carolina Exposition. Okay? And keep in mind, the Tariff of Abominations was brutal. I mean, I would protest the Tariff of Abominations. It was crazy. It was over half, over 50%. Now, what the document asserted is that if the federal government did not repeal the tariff, what would South Carolina do? Secede. So they're saying, we're not going to enforce it, and we're talking about leaving. We're not going to enforce it, and we're going to leave. Over what issue? A tariff. This is where people usually say, oh, the Civil War called over tariff. Well, if you can call it 1848, I'd agree with you. Or 1829. You know, it wasn't. So you have both a debate in, for example, well, I'll show you. You have a debate in the Senate where the guy who's been arguing in front of the Supreme Court will now start to make his name at a national level in the Senate. Senator Webster rises and defends our nation, one nation concept. A rival from South Carolina, Senator Hayne, so it's called the Webster-Hayne debate, will rise and defend the rights of South Carolina. Now you have some foreshadowing. Which state's going to start the ball rolling downhill? Ball rolling downhill. South Carolina. We'll talk about why again soon. So Webster makes a brilliant argument. And Webster says that the nation is what? The indivisible expression of one nation of people. You know, I hear that term. I hear people pledging allegiance to it. I pledge allegiance. I believe in that concept. And then I look at our election and I'm like, I don't think that's true. I don't think we're indivisible. I think we're really, really divisible. The key is that as long as the divisible doesn't divide the nation. You have differing opinions. Very, very different opinions on how the government should work. That's okay. That's okay. But the nation itself must be a singular expression. The ideas and foundation principles and institutions of the nation must be held. Right? Hayne is taking us back to what concept? The compact theory, which is that the states were sovereign and created America. You understand? And thus the states maintain this sovereignty. 10th Amendment, Supremacy Clause. Right? You understand? One nation under God, indivisible. 50 assembled states confederated. Right? So this is a continuance of the debate about the role of government in our country, which we are still having to this day. Still having. So with Webster, it is the idea of a sovereign state of one nation. Okay, everybody got that? And of course, this is what's going to lead to Well, if you can't nullify it, what do? Leave it. That philosophy. Now, they have, here are the key takeaways. By the way, Jackson and Calhoun are at a dinner, and Jackson says, our federal union, it must be preserved. All right. And Calhoun raises his glass and toasts the union next to our liberty most dear. You know, so they're like toasting off at each other kind of thing. And of course, Webster says the union is liberty, one and inseparable. Right. So these are the voices. If you have the voice of the South, one of them, right, the principal voice of the South, the voice of the Midwest and authority, and the voice of New England. So two of the regions seem to be consistently supported. That's kind of foreshadowing, isn't it? By the way, Jackson also stares directly at Calhoun and says, if a single hair on the head of a tax collector is harmed, I will hang the first nullifier I see in South Carolina. And he stares right at Calhoun when he says it, meaning I'll hang you from sour apple tree, right? So he threatens South Carolina, all right? And so Congress gets together and cuts the tariff by 10%. South Carolina promptly nullified it, not lowering it. With that, Jackson gets authority from Congress. Guess what his authority is called? Called Little Rock, Arkansas? No. Why am I showing you this picture? Not that big. Why am I showing you federal troops in Little Rock, Arkansas walking with 5 kids? I could show you federal troops marching through Virginia. I could show you federal troops marching through Pennsylvania or federal troops in Alabama. What is Jackson's response? Can you take a wild guess? He gets Congress to pass a law, the Force Act. The Force Act, authorizing the use of armed forces on who? Any state.
Other states.
Yes, exactly. Jackson prepares to invade South Carolina. So when people tell me that Abraham Lincoln was unprecedented, I'm like, you're full of crap. Jackson would have done it if they not back down. You know, Washington moves into Pennsylvania at the head of an army. This is exactly what the federal Constitution created, the authority to deal with insurrection, right? But Henry Clay does not want Andrew Jackson coming out of this even bigger of a hero, right? So he quickly moves his Congress, Speaker of the House, remember? He quickly moves them to reduce the tariff another 10% and to have it phased back all the way to the tariff of 1816 over the next 10 years. So ultimately taking the tariff back. Jackson signs the tariff. He's no fan of the tariff. Keep this in mind. He is not a fan of the tariff. But what is he a fan of? Federal authority. He is not going to allow a state to deny the right of power of the federal government. Everybody understand? That's why I connected you to Little Rock, Arkansas. Guys, then President Eisenhower was no fan of desegregation. He thought Earl Warren was tampering with stuff that was not ready for our country to deal with. But when Brown versus Board of Education was decided, who did he send to Little Rock, Arkansas? The 101st Airborne Division. The guys would just beat Hitler. This is what federal authority looks like. So when President Trump sends troops or DHS officials to Oregon, that's within his authority. We don't like that sometimes. People are like, oh, you know, it's too much. Well, hey, that's the role of the president. At least it's determined by Jackson, Lincoln, Washington, Eisenhower, Kennedy. I mean, I can give you a bunch of folks that do. All right. So with this Clay gets the compromise tariff in 1833 passed. The South Carolina back down. Yes. You think they want to call is Andrew Jackson bluff? He's not a bluffer. I mean, this is not a guy who's pretending. Give me the authority and I'm going to crush it. That's Jackson. So, and I think if they not passed the law, he'd have still done it. Because I know Jackson, at least his style of governance. So that's the tariff problem, the tariff of abomination. Now, who saves the day? Clay, second great compromise effort. First is the MoComp, second compromise tariff. Got it? All right. So in the end, Calhoun has opened up a can that can't be closed, but he isn't the first. The Kentucky and Virginia resolutions did it too. It's always been there. Okay? Guys, the problem we have now, there's a bigger problem, I think, afoot than who holds the office of president. Just this past week, Oregon voted to legalize heroin, psilocybin. Now, if you're a 10th Amendment fan, you're like, yeah, let's hear it for states' rights. Woo! If you believe in the supremacy of federal law, you're concerned because there is a law that they're grotesquely violating. Nobody's enforcing. This is not how law is supposed to work. It's not supposed to work like, well, the president he didn't have time for that, or not interested in that. So Jackson, who, by the way, is a states' rightist at its core, did his duty here. Okay, this is where he doesn't do his duty, but he represents the common man, and this is what we'll continue with now. I have time. Good. I know it's a lot of lecture, but I'm trying to get you ready for Friday. So, what about Native Americans? Why are Native Americans an issue? It's probably Indians, y'all. Then, now, whatever. Saw the other day where Oklahoma, half of Oklahoma gets to go back to the Native Americans. See how that works out. It'd be interesting. What had been the pattern of our relationship with Native Americans leading into the 1820s?
We don't get along.
All right, that's one part of the pattern.
We kept pushing them westward.
That's a bigger part of the pattern, right? You know, and you don't have to say we. America is my country, but it wasn't my country in 1820. You know, like they, if you want to call it that. You know, but I understand.
We still represent America, though, so that thereby we are at fault as well.
Yeah, I see. It's that slippery slope mindset that makes me think white people would have to apologize for slavery. You know, the stuff in the past is not we. It's not me. It's them. They. You know, I mean, yes, I'm America today, but I'm not responsible for America 200 years ago. You know, so it's not a we to me. It's them. But today, America, I'll say we. So here's the them that I was asking you about. If you wanted to be a Native American and not get pushed out of the way, what did you have to do? No, that didn't work. If you fought back, you did get pushed out of the way. What is the Go ahead.
Could you sign a treaty?
Yeah, that happened. But that wasn't enough. What was the condition of the treaty usually? See, man, we've broken a lot of, like I just did it, Christopher, thanks. A bunch of the treaties were broken. Make it non-possessive. Yeah, the treaties were not something that would typically get stuck to. So there's a group, and I don't have it up here, but it's in the reading, I think, called the Society for Propagating the Gospel among the Indians. The Society for Propagating the Gospel. So the federal government's policy and this organization's policy was that if you became a Christian, and the key word here is assimilate, ASSIMILATE. If you assimilate, that means walk the white man's path. If you were a Native American who became like a white person, then were you supposed to be treated fairly? Yeah, became a Christian and did that thing, right? And so you actually had several tribes do this. They were called the 5 civilized tribes. You can see them here in bold. 4 of them were within that assimilated culture. Chickasaw, Cherokee, Choctaw, and Creek. One of them hadn't really assimilated, but had consistently fought throughout the whole period, the Seminoles, down in Florida. Okay, so the 4 C's, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Creek. And again, you'll see within their tribal reservations, these are reservations that were, not reservations, these are lands that were determined by treaties under Thomas Jefferson, under George Washington, and later, okay? And so if you see here, here's the frontier of North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, northwestern Georgia, and northeastern Alabama. So this is the Cherokee Nation, right? The Cherokee had gone so far to assimilate, they built houses, like just like American houses. Some of them had slaves and were growing tobacco. All right. One of their great leaders, a man named Sequoyah, had even developed a written alphabet, a Sequoyah language, a Cherokee language that could write the history of the Cherokee and stuff like that. So were the Cherokee walking the white man's path? Yes. The problem was they were in the white man's path. All right, because if you look here, this part of Georgia was right in the middle of westward expansion. And they wanted to move right in there. Georgians, all right? Georgians who were expanding. So this is what happens. Jackson discovers that Native Americans are not leaving Georgia, East Tennessee. And so he says, for their own benefit, they need to be relocated. They need to be relocated where they won't be in the way of westward expansion. Now, had they done everything they were supposed to do? Not enough. You have a minister. Well, first of all, you had a group called the Cherokee, see them there, who sued Georgia. Georgia was moving into, Georgians were moving into their country. Understand, who's going to be the Chief Justice? Take a wild guess. It's been our only Chief Justice, John Marshall. Marshall is going to say, Cherokee Nation, it's so nice that you came and visited. You are a domestic, dependent nation, which means you can't break into you. Georgia can't. It's not a virgin. It's not the Supreme Court. It's Georgia. Georgia cannot violate your treaty. The major reason is because the treaty is defended under the Act of Supremacy. The Supremacy Clause says laws and treaties, which means can Georgia violate the law of the United States? No. All right, so yay, Cherokee, you win. 2 years later, when people are still moving in there, you had an actual missionary. Oh, by the way, go back to Cherokee. Marshall also says, this is true who you are, but sorry, you're Cherokee, you're not citizens, you shouldn't be here. See you later. All right, so they leave. Then you have a missionary who gets arrested, all right, and tried to be forcibly removed. It was a white man. And so he sues on behalf of the Cherokee. And it's called Worcester versus Georgia. Worcester versus Georgia. Okay, see it there? And in that, Marshall reiterates, who cannot go into this territory? The people of Georgia or Alabama. Or they can't go in there because it's a nation within the United States, protected by the United States. And this is where you have a serious constitutional crisis. Look at what Andrew Jackson says.
Made his decision. Now let him enforce it.
Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. Guys, the courts have no enforcement mechanism. This is how you enforce a law, not with courts. So what is Jackson saying to the good people of Georgia? Have at it, right? We're not going to get in your way, the government, right? And so Marshall is discovering the very unfortunate reality of the judicial branch, which is if the executive branch doesn't want to enforce it, it has no authority. That's bad news. This is not the kind of stuff you want to see presidents doing. You understand? Now, this is what Jackson did popular. Listen to that. Enormously popular. Did he side with the common man over the Cherokee man? Yeah. Yeah. John Quincy Adams had the nerve to actually withhold it. I mean, hold up the Cherokee. How dare you? So this is what I'm saying, guys. As part of history, sometimes presidents don't do things they're supposed to do. Okay? Especially Jackson. And then it got worse. Not only did Jackson really not give any assistance in helping these guys get that relocated, they were forcibly moved out. But it makes it look right there like a seamless activity, right? Guys, whenever they got the rivers, nobody would take them across. These people froze to death. These people starved. They had to find any way they could to get to Oklahoma. Dramatically numbers of deaths. We had to, well, we didn't have to. America fought a war again with the Seminoles to forcibly remove. So this is the Indian Removal Act's product. Well, what is it called collectively? The Trail of Tears. This is the Trail of Tears. Whenever red people encountered white people at that point in history, a good number of them usually were forced to do it. Okay? And so it was politically popular. Was it consistent with the Constitution of the Supreme Court? No. Here's Jackson in the cartoon. He professed his great, and he had worked around Indians a lot. He probably knew more about Indians than just about any American. All right. Of course, he spent a good time killing them, but they were historic rivals. Here you can see little chiefs, held kind of like dolls, So this is a tragic end to those folks, and we'll finish the bank stuff tomorrow. I definitely want you to know the Trail of Tears and understand that there was a system to protect them. The legal system. They did what good Americans would do. What did they do? They sued. They didn't fight. They didn't go to war. I have a house. Let me sue you. And that didn't work. Because the law didn't apply to them. So we talk about unequal treatment in history. There were people who tried, but we're still dealing with this today. By the way, guys, where is the lowest level of income in America currently? What people have the lowest degree of income? Native Americans. Native Americans are the poorest people in America to this day. So it starts long before this, and it will continue long after this. But I would definitely be familiar with the Indian Removal Act and at the 5 civilized tribes. Okay, And the line here is cruel and unjust to compel the Aborigines to abandon the graves of their fathers. You know, in other words, if you think about Native Americans, the land is sacred, right? Their ancestors lived there for hundreds and hundreds of years. Now, I don't have in my notes here, but I want to point out there was 2 conflicts that were fought during that period. The one I mentioned was the Seminole Wars. You should know Chief Osceola. I think one of the saddest things watching Florida State University have a white guy dressed up as an Indian riding around throwing a flaming spear in the middle of a football field and calling him Osceola. Yeah. I don't know. The whole Redskin thing is troublesome for some people, but I'm like, dude, it's a sports team. Pick a different name. You got a gazillion to choose from. All right. And then the other, here we got another sports team for you, Chicago. Up in Illinois, you have the famous Black Hawk War. Chicago's hockey team are the Blackhawks, right? Yeah, we got some Native American preservation in our country. So the Black Hawk War is interesting. It's the last east of the Mississippi tribe to resist root movement, fight back. And interesting enough, you have 2 men who fight in it, not together. They're on different units. But one is a young man named Jefferson Davis, young Jeff Davis, and the other is a young man named Abraham Lincoln. These 2 young men will fight in the Black Hawk War against a common enemy, and then later will be the leaders of the people who fight against us, each other. So anyway, that's it for today. Hopefully you've had plenty to digest and recall and study. We made about halfway through, I think, that chapter. And if you have questions about Jackson, we'll continue tomorrow, so feel free to ask.